Welcome everybody to our Technology Earth webinar series here at Triple Ring Technologies. I'm Sheila Hemami. I lead the Environment and Sustainability Business Unit, and I lead our Boston office. And I'm speaking to you from our office in the South Bay. Actually, I'm reading last year's. I'm speaking to you from our office in Boston today. Triple Ring's longstanding mission is to improve human health through innovative technologies. And we all now recognize that human health is completely intertwined with having a healthy planet. So applying our capabilities to a healthy planet is a natural extension of our mission. And this webinar series is really a natural expansion for us. In this series, we convene world experts and technologists working on a variety of environmental challenges to frame the problems and the challenges of scale up and to discuss viable solutions. Our goal is to connect individuals working in these problem spaces with the innovation ecosystem that has so successfully delivered life-changing solutions in the biotech space. So I'm glad that you're all with us here today, and I'm very much looking forward to today's webinar. Now, before we start, I'll mention some logistics. Please pose your questions in the Q&A box, and I will be moderating the questions. We'll take a few questions after each speaker, if they're available, and then we'll open things up to the entire panel at the end. Now, today, our topic is enabling accessible ocean data, and we'll learn about the current state of large-scale ocean data collection and two enabling technologies to support lower cost data collection. And we've got three fabulous speakers for you today with unique perspectives on the problem. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Kristen Yarincik. Kristen is Executive Director of the IUS Association, and I'll let her tell you what that is. She's going to introduce and really frame the grand problem space for us. She's going to describe the current state of what's collected, by whom, how it's used, and perhaps even some wish lists for data enabling technologies. Kristen brings over 20 years of experience in leading community building and convening efforts around topics including ocean observation, ocean exploration, marine biodiversity, ocean education, and workforce development. So with that, Kristen, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Thanks, Sheila. I'm going to get my screen shared here. Hopefully you're seeing that. Okay. All right. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate today. As Sheila noted, I represent the IUS Association, which is a nonprofit organization. We work with the federal U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System, or IUS, that's led by the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. So the IUS Association helps to support the regional to national system that's built and maintained through public-private partnerships. IUS is the operational coastal ocean observing system for the US and the US contribution to the global ocean observing system. It's a layered and networked system driven by national and regional stakeholder needs. The IUS regional systems engage continually with users in their communities to understand their needs and to serve those needs by collecting, integrating, and making publicly accessible data from a variety of sources and partners. From these data, the IUS regions, as well as others in the information services sectors, develop and provide products and tools in support of decision-making. Okay, so today's discussion is about ocean data, and I'm going to kind of start at the top broad view of this. I'm sure it's not news to anyone in the audience, but the ocean covers more than 70% of the planet and supports all life on Earth. It provides us with oxygen, food, and other resources, and absorbs 26% of the carbon emitted to the atmosphere each year by human activities. But that's not without consequences. The ocean is warming, and the chemistry is changing, which has significant impact on ecosystems and marine life. Impact we don't fully understand because it occurs amidst multiple stressors on the ocean from human activity, and because we lack enough data to forecast ecosystem change. Because the ocean is so vast and so deep in most places, it's hard to access and study. We've mapped about 20% of the global seafloor. We've only explored about 5% of the ocean's volume. And I think it's fair to say that even less than that is systematically monitored. This graphic on the screen comes from the World Meteorological Organization and Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission's Ocean Ops program, and shows the status of the elements of the global ocean observing system as of about a year ago. Looks pretty good, right? Except that the dots on the map are sized for visibility and they're not to scale to the ocean. So actual coverage of these systems is actually pretty sparse. So we have gaps everywhere, and in particular, the deep sea, which includes depths below 200 meters by some definitions, and in the polar regions where change is happening much more rapidly when compared to other places. And we lack data about life in the ocean in pretty much all places. This map from Satterwhite et al. Shows the status as of 2021 of long-term biological observations, long-term being defined here as greater than 5 years. So you can see there are lots of gaps. We need better baselines against which to measure and monitor change, and more data to understand the processes driving change, especially with respect to marine life and ecosystem function. Some good news, we have new policy drivers for increasing ocean data collection. Last month, the White House released the Ocean Climate Action Plan, outlining a strategy for using the potential of the ocean to address the climate crisis, such as through offshore wind energy development and approaches for ocean-based carbon dioxide removal and sequestration to reach a carbon neutral future. While promising for mitigating climate change, realizing these would mean more human activity and potential impact on the ocean. Sustaining and expanding on ocean observing systems is a cross-cutting priority of the plan for those reasons. So offshore wind, marine carbon dioxide removal require baseline data and continued data collection throughout all stages of research, development, and operation. We need updated observing strategies, including around data sharing, and new kinds of sensing technologies to be able to observe and monitor the effectiveness and impact, and in some cases, even the feasibility of these ambitious priorities. On Earth Day, NOAA announced $562 million in funding to make communities and the economy more resilient to climate change. This funding would create nearly 150 new projects that will rely on ocean and coastal data, but that will also generate a lot of new data. It's nearly impossible, even for people highly aware of what's going on in ocean science, to know where all the data collection efforts are happening and where that data go. We need to increase data collaboration, discovery, and accessibility so we can get the most out of these investments and maximize data utility. Our gaps in ocean data aren't necessarily as great as we might see from some of these maps. It's just that a lot of data are still not publicly or easily accessible. In the US, the IUS regional systems are a place where data sharing, integration, and accessibility can occur. But more data providers and data funders need to be aware of these systems and take advantage of their roles as data integrators. In addition to IUS, there are many complementary data aggregators that may focus at different scales or different types of data, and many of these do collaborate to make data as widely accessible as possible, but we do have more work to do. As climate change impacts grow, communities need actionable data tailored to their specific needs or that provide information at more local scales to support decision-making. For example, they may want to know whether a particular road is going to flood on a particular day. Understanding community needs requires regular engagement, and this is something the IUS regions do well too. The regional systems have built trust in their communities and can support partners in bringing new resilience-focused projects and technologies to these communities. IUS also has existing physical and cyber infrastructure to leverage for these tailored community efforts, making them more cost-effective and bringing greater utility to the data than the core project itself. Here I show two examples of such projects that are facilitated through the regional IUS systems and their partners. At the top, images from our regional system in the Southeast US, Sakura, who's working with our fellow panelists, Brian Glazer's company, and other partners to develop a network of low-cost water level sensors to provide real-time data for local flooding alerts and improving community resilience. At the bottom, 3 IUS regions around the Pacific have developed the Backyard Buoys project, which utilizes these small, easily portable buoys from SOFAR Ocean Technologies to empower Indigenous communities with technology and data to address information needs that complement their traditional knowledge systems. So yes, we need more ocean data and information services that meet the needs of a range of users and scales, and we need new technologies to facilitate both. I'm going to end with a few points on the challenges of scaling commercialization and of understanding the economic value of ocean data. The Marine Technology Society, along with the Global Ocean Observing System and NOAA, recently released a draft report of their Dialogues with Industry initiative. This report articulates some key challenges in maturing and growing the ocean enterprise to meet the demand for actionable ocean data and information. So at a high level, these challenges include difficulty in articulating ocean observing's market size and potential and profitability. Right now, also the governments around the globe are the primary funders of ocean observation and technology development. So we need to attract more non-governmental investment in these things. And finally, we need to overcome risk-related costs across the entire value chain. So we also need to shift the paradigm to find the balance between the current framework for ocean observing, which is data for the public good, and growing an ecosystem of paying customers for new ventures and data applications. And for sure, we need to clarify where the line is between those two. There's no straightforward fix for any of these, but it's the environment we're working in. And the report also contains some recommended actions that we can use to move us towards solutions to growing the ocean enterprise. And I can't give those justice today, but I do encourage you to read the report at this link when you have a chance. So that was quick and high level, but I hope it offered some broad context for ocean data and ocean observing and for framing the discussion today. Thank you again to Triple Ring, and I look forward to learning from my co-panelists.
Kristen, thank you so much. So one quick question that came in while you were talking. One of the things you mentioned when you had the map up of the ocean observing system was that the gaps weren't as great as they seemed. But one challenge is that a lot of the data is not publicly available. And of course, we also know that the ocean is large and the ocean is deep. And the question that came in, and I'm going to, it asks for a quantitative value. What percentage of the ocean floor is currently being monitored? But maybe, can you comment a little bit on, floor measurements and the challenges and, maybe if somebody's looking for ocean floor data, where are they more likely to be able to find some of it?
That's a great question. So I mentioned, we've only mapped about 20% of the global seafloor. So assuming that's maybe what's meant, I think the question also addressed monitoring, which is a really different thing than just having gone out one time to map and observe something. So I'd say I don't have any exact figures for any of this, but if you're looking for bathymetric data, information about the seafloor, one place to go would be the JEBCO Seabed 2030 project, which is aggregating this seafloor data and making it publicly accessible. It's a large global collaboration for the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That was great. So we'll now move on to our second speaker, and we got a little bit of a hint of what was coming from Kristen. Our second speaker is Dr. Brian Glazer, professor of oceanography at the University of Hawaii and founder and CEO of Hohonu. Now, Brian is not an engineer, but he's a self-described tinkerer and has always worked closely with engineers to build new solutions to better understand the environment. I was introduced to Brian over 5 years ago as somebody who was doing really novel and exciting work in low-cost ocean monitoring. And being an engineer myself, I was very excited about what he was doing. And he's going to tell us more about that now. So Brian, I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, and thanks for having me today. And thanks to Kristen for that great intro and frame setting. So I'm Brian. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, lived up and down the East Coast, and have been here in Hawaii for 19 years. As Sheila mentioned, my day job is as an oceanographer. I'm a professor in the University of Hawaii Oceanography Department, and we've launched Hohonu. I'm co-founder and CEO. Hohonu is technically a public-private startup that we've launched to help commercialize and take to scale some of the technologies that we developed in my lab over the past 6 years. Basic R&D with funding from National Science Foundation, NOAA Sea Grant and NERS and others, as well as support from philanthropic. We got a lot of R&D support from Eric and Wendy Schmidt's Family Foundation, Schmidt and a division of that, Schmidt Marine Technology Partners. So part of the problem, of course, is that the accelerating impacts that we're seeing from climate change are just baked into our future. It's outpacing what we had anticipated. Even if we stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow, we're going to see increases in the frequency and the variability and the impact from flooding events. Villages in the South Pacific Island nations are being relocated. Homes in Florida and Hawaii are falling into the ocean. And even in South Carolina, downtown Charleston, there have been more moderate flooding events in the last 2 years than in the 80 years previous to 2000. It's only going to get worse as we move forward. Here we go. So part of the problem with climate change isn't just the problem of climate change. Most of the water level data that exists today is managed by federal governments. That's historically been what's necessary and sufficient. Their sensors are extremely accurate and reliable, but they're hundreds of thousands of dollars. They take a team of experts days to install. Like in the cartoon on the lower left there, they're bulky. They may end up taking coverage, spatial coverage of the end of a pier, for example. And because of the cost and the technical challenges associated with installing these, they result in limited data sets. For 95,000 miles of coastline in the US, NOAA maintains fewer than 300 water level stations. And so this network density had been sufficient until recently. And we're not out to replace NOAA or NASA. NOAA and NASA do a great job of saying basin scale or long scale changes of global sea level rise. What we're out to do is explain impacts on the hyperlocal, because that's the kinds of questions that we're hearing from folks. It's a time in a lot of things in our climate change era are depressing, but however, the possibilities and the excitement around applying technologies that haven't yet been applied to climate and ocean sciences make this a pretty exciting time for thinking about disruption in the way that we used to do things. So that's what we're doing at Hohonu. We are a core group of scientists. We're providing hyperlocal data for tides, floods, and sea level rise. Because we were born from an academic research lab, the idea of maintaining rigor throughout development of increasing spatial scale is inherent in the DNA of the company. The NSF award that kicked off much of being able to scale this outside of a lab project was literally entitled Democratizing Access to Ocean Observing Technology. And so we were getting feedback from local nonprofits that we worked with saying things like the nearest tide gauge isn't close enough. We don't have a USGS gauge on the streams running into our estuary. We need help monitoring. And these groups oftentimes didn't have budgets to be able to tap into like we do as academic scientists. And so that fundamentally was the problem that we were setting out to try to change. Over 2014 to 2019, again, maybe $2.5 million or so in terms of R&D to make the platform robust. We were getting demand that exceeded our capacity to be able to do this in the lab as a lab project. And so we launched Hohonu. We just recently closed a $1.8 million funding round to be able to scale internally the capacity for growing this. What Hohonu does is what I do with graduate students. We sit down one-on-one, look at a Google Earth image, think about experimental design. What is the flooding issue in your home watershed? How many sensors might we need to deploy? What are the problems we're trying to answer? It's not just a sensor measurement, it's data quality assurance, quality control, and being able to automate that at scale with backend and analytics. It's the cyber infrastructure to be able to take telemeter data from the field, ensure quality data, and then visualize that for non-experts, right? There are mayors in South Carolina who want to roll over at 3 o'clock in the morning, look at their cell phone app and say, do I need to deploy emergency services to close roads or shut down? We hear from stories about parents who can't pick up their kids from preschool during high tide flooding events, not storms, just normal, episodic, right? King tide events, for example, flooding events. And so we want to be able to instrument that to give real-time data to the folks who need it most, and then also be able to provide that back-end level of expertise for the more sophisticated data users who don't want to look at a web portal for data. They want to go through an API and do machine to machine for maybe their own analytics. And so that's in a nutshell what we kind of package and offer with Hohonu. There's a hardware component for sure. We are able to offer for a very, very cost-effective price point, the ability to measure empirical data in new sites. And this is that gap filling capability. So between Charleston, South Carolina and Fort Pulaski, Georgia, there are communities after communities after communities who are saying that the nearest tide gauges aren't delivering the data that they need to see on 6-minute or hourly or daily basis as we roll into a storm surge or as we roll toward a king tide event. And so that's the kind of empirical data that we're able to offer. We've spent a long time developing the hardware, and so it's very modular and open architecture. It's set it and forget it, 3.5-watt solar panel, internal power, modular connectivity solutions. So 95% of what we're deploying is cellular IoT. We can swap that out for satellite comms. We've done that in remote Alaska. We're moving toward doing that throughout South Pacific Island nation partners. But then also we made the sensing modular as well. So our first go-to-market as Hohonu is rolling out widespread capability for water level, but we're also able to swap out that sensor at the bottom for a more advanced, more expensive microwave sensor if we need higher amounts, or if we're dealing with ice fog, for example, in the air gap, and need to get rid of the ultrasonic sensor. But we can also do water quality, and we've deployed these throughout Hawaii in partnership with our aquaculture friends, looking at some of the parameters listed there on the slide: dissolved oxygen, salinity, conductivity, and such. Again, born from an academic lab, the first thing that we wanted to be sure of was that rigor can be maintained. We've done side-by-side comparisons of our water level sensor next to NOAA tide gauges again and again at different latitudes, and we're just as good. We're within plus or minus 1.5 millimeters or so accuracy. So we're convinced that the empirical data coming in is of sufficient quality. And we're gaining traction. And so this has been working. We rolled out Hohonu in 2019, and we were competitively awarded some contracts within the Integrated Ocean Observing Systems Regional Association in the Southeast. We're contracted to occupy about 60 sites from Florida to North Carolina, working with individual communities. We partnered with the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association. This is a national nonprofit with deep roots for coastal beach restoration, thinking about dredging projects. They have deep ties and relationships with the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as with NOAA divisions, working with the communities. And so this helped us, a small startup from a research lab in Hawaii, be able to gain rapid penetration throughout the East Coast, and especially through Florida to North Carolina, working with 60 different municipalities. Once we started to prove the concept, word of mouth spreading. And so we're now in about 12 states and 90 locations, replicating that model of working with federal agencies, working with local, state, county agencies, working with local nonprofits, environmental restoration groups, aquaculture companies, environmental engineering firms who see the benefit in not having to reinvent the wheel for hardware, the low cost, cost-effective solution for real-time monitoring, but then also the data analytics and the visualization tools that come along with it. So some of the kinds of clients that we've been gaining traction with in Maine include town resilience projects and working with Gulf of Maine Research Institute. So academic partners, again, see value in not having to reinvent the wheel of scaling up localized coastal ocean observing community projects. Sea Grant, indigenous groups. We got our start here in Hawaii working with about 15 different local nonprofits, excuse me, dedicated to cultural and environmental restoration. Excuse me, I'm getting over COVID. Here in Hawaii and aquaculture communities through North Carolina, South Carolina, and as I mentioned, in Hawaii. The measurements, the empirical data, the hardware is just the start, really being able to give publicly accessible and shareable data online. This is everything that we're bringing in is available at dashboard.hohonu.io, and I'll put that URL up in just a moment. One example of the way that this has gained traction with a small community in South Carolina is for those king tide events. And so right now, Kiowa Island in South Carolina is using our data from an installation to preemptively close roads as we approach a predicted high tide event. We're showing them in real time how bad it's going to be in their location. Interpolated federal predictions may underestimate the impact of a king tide event, for example, whereas we can provide empirical data to show in real time how bad it's actually deviating from predictions. On top of that, we've then also been using our own algorithm to improve upon predictive analytics, starting with tidal harmonics, which is where most federal agencies start for tide predictions, and then improving upon that by 80% in most cases. This works not only on episodic, periodic king tide events, but also tropical storms. We had sensors in place, a great network in place for Tropical Storm Elsa last summer, as well as Hurricane Ian. And all of a sudden, when these side-by-side communities are able to have their own empirical data, not only does it help the community, but it helps community planning across the coastline. And so from Kiowa Island to Island of Palms, these agencies, small resilience offices, were now able to have for the first time their own data and talk to each other about management, both from emergencies in the heat of the moment, but also longer term coastal resilience planning. This also works for tsunamis. So in 2018, we had or 2019, we had a strong earthquake in the Alaskan Aleutians. We were curious whether or not we'd see a tsunami here in Hawaii. By the time that the Tsunami Warning Center had canceled the warning for Hawaii, we knew something was coming. We knew it wouldn't be devastating, but we had sensors in place. And so what you see outlined in the stippled box there as we come down, instead of a smooth transition through a tide change, we see these little oscillations. And this captured a 10-centimeter high tsunami wave that was oscillating in the Pacific Basin, present on windward Oahu. Not only did the sensor capture the empirical data showing a couple hours of this 8 to 10 centimeter high tsunami oscillating, but the blue and the red circles are our back-end AI actually capturing this event as an anomalous event, which could then trigger alerts, but then also feed into improving tsunami warning models, especially in harbors where maybe aren't as instrumented as we'd like to be. So in summary, what we're really trying to do is help the federal agencies who want to do this increase spatial coverage while also maintaining that academic rigor. There is a balance that we can do today by taking advantage of some of the emerging and emergent technologies that have come out of Silicon Valley, as well as research labs over the last 10 years. It's been done for weather, it's been done for wind. It hasn't been done yet for coastal oceanography, and that's what we're really poised to do and gaining traction in doing. Out of the lab into the communities and really building that community capacity to meet the demand. And I'll go ahead and stop here. I'll leave this up to show some of the partners, and the URL that I mentioned is freely available for folks to explore with our dashboard and look at some of the data on hand. And with that, I'll kick it back over to Sheila for a moment.
Super cool, Brian. Every time I see you give this talk, there's more really neat stuff in it. So easy question from the audience, and I think probably worth mentioning again, because what you offer is so compact compared with state of the art. So what are again the dimensions of your unit?
Yeah, great question. So when the feds go out and install a gauge, it's the end of a pier. And when we do it, I pack it up in a box that's literally this big, and I second day air FedEx it to you. We help you think about mounting solutions. We want to maintain rigor, right? So we don't just want to stick it on a fence post and call it even. We want to be able to survey that in so that we can compare datums globally to mean the low water. So we do help maybe inexperienced customers think about what it takes to install a sensor in a new location with rigor and what those mounting solutions might be. But the fact that literally my 10-year-old daughter can come out into the field into a 400-year-old Hawaiian fish pond and help me install a tide gauge, hopefully explains kind of just how easy it is. It's only about this big.
Right. Going back to your original NSF grant title, democratizing access. Very cool. Thank you, Brian. So I think that between the question that we got during Kristen's talk about ocean floor monitoring and Brian leading us through small sensors is a very nice introduction to our last speaker. Our third speaker is Dr. Meriah Arias-Thode, Chief Scientist for the Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific. Meriah has a PhD in marine biology, and she's also been a research microbiologist with the U.S. Army Reserves. Now, I met her at an ARPA-E Proposers Day on measurement of ocean-based carbon dioxide sequestration earlier this year. And at that Proposers Day, she described her group's work on energy generation, which has very exciting implications for enabling sensing in the ocean and specifically in benthic areas. So with that, Meriah, please tell us about your group's work.
All right, thank you all very much. And thank you, Sheila, honestly, for inviting me to speak here today. This is very exciting for us. So my name is Meriah Arias-Thode. I work for the US Navy as a civilian scientist. I have to make it clear though, I am not speaking on behalf of the Navy. Okay, now you've got that out of the way. So I am here to talk to you today about our beacons technology. So this is essentially a microbial fuel cell technology. It's benthic enabled because it's energy from mud, autonomous because we're leaving it alone, collaborative operations and notification system. So what we've really been focused on doing is trying to get that information to ourselves in a daily email and even on alert. So before I get started, I'd like to tell you about what exactly is this benthic microbial fuel cell technology. So all living organisms require a terminal electron acceptor, terminal electron donor. Such as you and I, we need oxygen as our terminal electron acceptor, and our terminal electron donor is glucose. Sometimes that glucose is in the form of pizza or a cappuccino, but it's still, you still have that terminal electron donor. So if you think about a marine environment, oxygen is still one of the best electron acceptors in that environment. So if you're in a marine microorganism and you're living at that sediment water interface and you can use oxygen as your terminal electron acceptor, then you will. It is thermodynamically favorable. So here I'm going to go over a little bit of thermodynamics with you. But if you're able to use oxygen, the thermodynamics are about minus 3,000 kilojoules per mole. Now, the more negative the number, the more spontaneous the reaction, the more likely it will occur. If you're an anaerobic microorganism, though, and you're using iron 3 or sulfate and reducing these as your terminal electron acceptor, then those thermodynamics are about minus 100 kilojoules per mole. So you can see it is much more favorable to use oxygen if it's available to you. Now, for many of these microorganisms, it is toxic. However, this is how benthic microbial fuel cell technology works. I think of it as a biological battery where you have the plus and the minus sign, right? That's how batteries function, is that redox gradient. So you have an anode that is, buried, or at least under anaerobic conditions. You electrically connect it to a cathode that's in the water column where oxygen can be reduced. Because of this gradient, bacteria will donate electrons to this anode, and we're able to capture them to power these sensors. So this beacons technology harvests energy from electrogenic bacteria in sediments. So I wish to say that this is a green technology. Everything is non-toxic and non-corrosive. This technology has been around since 1911. However, it used to cost more energy to extract the energy available. But now, because of how electronics have improved and so on, it actually is more cost effective where we can actually power sensors. So our concept of operations is where you would have these sensors strewn throughout a water column and perhaps relay information to each other or to a communications buoy so that you can get that information in real time. So I did not do this alone. I have a fantastic team. So I'm an environmental microbiologist from Scripps Institute for Oceanography, and I have a multi-diverse team where we have electrical engineers that work on low power electronics or communications and material science. I have a mechanical engineer, computational scientist. So all of us together have really worked very hard and collaboratively to bring this technology forward. So here is one of our units. So the way we have designed these is to have sensor interoperability. So we have designed these specifically to trickle charge a 12-volt battery that in turn will power a sensor. That way you can have any sensor that you wish to have. We call it plug and play. As well, we've made these modular so that you can increase units designed if you need increased power generation. So on the bottom, you have some of the units are MicroSlat beacons that we designed to determine power potential. So we went to Sweden where it was very cold, and we deployed these in the Swedish Bay. So here you have time versus power generation. So what you always see in these microbial fuel cells is you have this lag phase, and this is very typical. The bacteria are getting used to the environment that they are in, and so they have to have these change their metabolic chemistries in order to donate electrons externally. but then they do. And this is 3 different units, and you can see over time we get power generation. Now the power here is only about 6 milliwatts per meter squared. It's not a lot. We're never going to power a submarine, but it's perpetual. And we have, you know, these function, they continue to function, and they continue to trickle charge that battery. We've deployed in many areas, to include down in the Pacific to 2,200 meters. We've shown power demonstration for 1 year and power potential measurements for up to 3 years that we've had. And so here is another one of our beacons units, the PentaSlat beacon. This unit is very similar to the MicroSlat. Again, you have an anode that is buried. This is about to 10 to 12 inches. You electrically connect it to these cathodes that are in the water column. And then we're powering, in this case, a temperature, oxygen, and pH sensor. So the way we designed this was to take this data every 15 minutes, send ourselves that information over the span of a day, a 24-hour email of all that information. But then we also said, hey, if you sense the pH is above or below a certain threshold, please send me a text message every 75 minutes. And it did. So in this case, we were in an environment here in Camp Pendleton where the temperature became warmer. And so then the pH increased at that time. So you can actually see here, hey, the pH is above like 8.4 at 10:15. And then 75 minutes later, hey, the pH is above 8.4. So this was fantastic and exciting that we're able to now give ourselves that daily information. So what you have here is, again, this is going to be total power versus time. So we always see this extra power generation in the beginning, and that's very typical for these. And so, but you're able to trickle charge and fully charge your battery. Then over time, when it moves colder, yes, the power does drop, but as it starts to warm up, you can see that then we're starting to increase our power generation again. All of this technology, the sensors and communications, our electrical engineering team made it cost only 23 milliwatts. So you can see we were definitely able to extend this lifetime of this battery and so on. And we expect it would have continued, except that in this one case, we had a 100-year storm event that just decimated our unit. But they're cheap enough that you can have multiple units. Here is another couple of form factors that I would like to share. Mostly, these were proof of concepts, but we did these to see if we could. So for example, one area we were thinking about using lighting up lights around a harbor. So we designed a 200-meter linear array. That's 600 feet. So what this is essentially, it's just a cable, a 2-conductor cable, and it's surrounded by carbon cloth. And so this is the anode. So this part here is the anode. We towed this behind a ship, and this was successfully buried. And these are the cathodes that came out of a different compartment every X meters. So this I can envision, what if you use something like this? And in response to the EOS presentation from earlier, you had sensors that are tethered to this power generation, so that you can have water column data as an example, like pH, temperature, and oxygen, because we are lacking in that water column data. As well, another form factor that we designed was something similar to that, but instead of it being one long array of 200 meters, we designed the septastrand beacon, which is 7 strands, each 30 meters. So now you have 210 meters. And we again towed this behind a ship. The anodes were buried completely, the cathodes in the overlying water column, and we powered a magnetometer and as well an acoustic modem with this unit. So this is the MicroLanders beacons we designed in response to determining, can we get power in the deep sea? So in the deep sea, which as Kristen said, is 200 meters or more, you can't use divers. We can't just go out there and put these in. So we wanted, number one. Number two, it's very cold. And there's not not light penetration, there's not going to be your organic carbon content. So we decided to determine, is there power potential out in the deep sea and what is it? And so we designed these units. These are only about 2 feet tall, but we had them in such a way that we could ourselves, like me, myself, could lift it, throw it off of a ship. It fell down to the seafloor in the right configuration and unfurled the anode at the seafloor. These were deployed at 100, 1,000, even 2,200 meters. And after X time, we designed it so that it was a sacrificial anode. So the anode would remain on the seafloor, the rest would come up and interface with the satellite. We were able to pick them up and download the data. So this was a fantastic feat that when we saw this power generation. So in some of these units, we fed them because we wanted to see sort of like if you feed them, will they come? And sure enough, we had, again, this is going to be power in milliwatts versus time. We had about 15 milliwatts per meter squared, which was shocking to us. But then if you think about it, let's go to a college dorm area. It may be freezing outside, but if you put pizza outside, people will come. So that's probably the same concept. So this unit we were thinking about, can you use it for something else? So not just for power generation. So we were thinking about other needs that may exist out there, such as environmental sensors, where you may want to know what is happening at that sediment water interface, because not a lot is known about this area. So could we put some sensors, or in this case, we're looking at metal contaminants or organic contaminants, and can you assess what is happening down there? So this way you would have to bring the whole anode back up, but we have ideas on how to do that. As well, you could probably use the frame itself to place sensors. And this way you would know, are the contaminants just in the seafloor? Are they coming up through the sediment water interface? Are they coming through the whole environment? Are they dense? And so on. So this is one other way to use these sensors. And so our current focus areas and next steps are to optimize power harvesting. This is what we're working on right now. A long time ago, it was not cost effective to use maximum power point tracking and so on, because it was just too expensive. Power was power hungry. But now these modern technologies have allowed us to now try and use maximum power point tracking and even have an adjustable resistance in situ, which allows you then to deploy without having to know before you go, what is your power level expectation? How do you deploy in the deep sea and obtain this all back up so that we're not leaving anything behind? And we're also focusing on these communications links so that you have, for example, this picture on the right, you have a unit deployed, it notices the pH has changed because maybe you have some contaminant that came into your aquaculture farm and you want to know in real time. So that is what we're also working towards. So I'm hoping that you can see that these beacons will help prolong the lifespan of your distributed sensors. And we think that they can be relevant for aquaculture, acid mine, coral reef restoration, carbon dioxide sequestration. So anywhere that you need the sensor information. You do need mud, but that's an aside. We've also seen that we can work in some sand, but we're hoping to be able to use this beacons technology as a green technology for environmental knowledge, because again, like somebody said, the more you know with regards to data, the better climate models you can have. Or if you're looking at aquacultures and so on, aquaculture farms, just knowledge about your environment. So with that, I would like to thank you and ask if you have any questions. So here's our beacons team in 2019, pre-COVID, and then recent pictures of some of the newer members. So thank you very much. And
All right.
now,
Thank you. Thank you so much. We've got about 11 minutes left on the hour. We've got a nice integrated question in the Q&A. So I think I might start off with that integrated question, and then I want to take a step back and ask you guys for perspective on a few things. So let's start off with the question and points to the questioner. We've got thinking off the cuff, would it be possible to combine Meriah's technology with Brian's technology to provide not only surface data, but also a power supply to complement the solar recharge capability, to provide data from shore depths in order to offer a more enhanced survey of oceanic activity. So there's a very integrative question. I will start off and say, I think the answer is yes, but Brian and Meriah, you guys live in this space, and maybe you can comment more broadly about, multimodal integration of both sensing methodologies. Does it make sense to have individual cheap sensors that are all doing their own thing and being integrated by an IUCE-like organization, or more of a single unit that has more stuff in it, sort of perhaps like an Argos float? I think that's a philosophical question, but maybe you guys can react, all of you.
Right. So I guess I can start. So I think Brian was saying his needs about 3 watts. We're in the milliwatts range. So I don't think, number one, and number two, Brian can use solar power. We're down in the mud, so we're not using solar power. And so I think his would be, I think what you can do though, is we can have an integrated software system so that you can have his data and our data, like for temperature, oxygen, and pH as an example. Brian, do you have any other comments to add to that?
You hit the nail on the head. Yeah. So I think that where we can, we use the sources available. Up at axial seamount, there's a cable, right? And so you can get away with whatever you want because you have tons and tons of unlimited power and bandwidth. And so in those kinds of places where you have huge investments in infrastructure, go for it, right? But in terms of the spatial variability and long-term presence, the kinds of work that you're doing is critical to having that maintained, consistent, unattended presence. For us, coastal flooding, we have the ability to use solar, and so we'll take advantage of that. We've got in our particular sensor, the largest power demand is through the telemetry comms, right? And so using cellular is 90% of our power budget. In remote areas where we can't use cellular and we have to use satellite, that more than triples. And so the batteries need to be larger, the solar panel needs to be larger. That said, we've successfully overwintered as far north as Alaska the last 2 years in a row. So thinking about cost benefit of power efficiency, improving on the hardware technology in order to get to an embedded systems point where it's very, very power efficient to take advantage of any kind of power coming in, I think is what has come out of this industry. We couldn't do this 5 years ago, and today we can.
Kristen, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I mean, I can't speak to these two technologies in particular, but I think the question really gets at the point that, we need to start thinking creatively about how we can better observe the ocean and improve coverage. These processes in the ocean are all interconnected. So the more we can try to co-locate different measurements and improve our models, I think it's, that's the direction we need to move in. So the question is on the right track for sure.
So we've got another question in the panel, but I'm going to interject a question of my own because I think it's extremely important in this space. And I would like to get the idea out there and get your comments on it. Brian, you mentioned that you are a public-private partnership in getting this technology out. Meriah, obviously you're working for the US Navy. This has been developed with taxpayer dollars. I believe it's available for licensing, but this is something
it is absolutely available.
Is there. And Kristen, you ended with comments on public and private entities need to get engaged in this. And perhaps I'd like to ask you guys to comment on the importance of collaboration and public-private partnerships across sectors in really making progress in this space and in getting things deployed. I like to think that describe it to other people as it's not like you can lock yourself in a closet. No matter how good your technology is, you're going to be able to roll it out by yourself. So perhaps you guys can talk about your experiences.
Right. So we do have Gene Fernando, and he's trying to form a company to try and license our technology right now. So we were part of a national security innovation network. So the Navy is recognizing that in order for the Navy to use technology, it has to be commercialized often to decrease how much it costs to make, right? And I'm sure, Brian, you went through this in the beginning, it costs more, and then over time you figure out ways to decrease cost. So it's the same kind of concept. So we have, luckily, the Naval Security Innovation Network and FedTech and Forge, and they're trying to have and help entrepreneurs license Navy technologies. I'm sure the Army as well and everything else too, but that kind of thing. But Brian, do you want to talk to some of that as well? And then I guess Kristen.
Yeah, I'd say that encouragement and navigating kind of what it takes to launch a technology out of a lab and into a marketplace, that wasn't my thing at all. I was a tenured professor of oceanography. Why would I ever try to start a startup, right? And so, the University of Hawaii, I can't understate how helpful it's been to work with their tech transfer office with the support of getting outside of an oceanography department and thinking about what it takes to do that. We got very creative, and so the first answer was potentially, oh, you invented a sensor, let's patent it and license it. And I said, no, you're missing the entire point of what we're trying to do, of the democratization of access idea. We don't want to just sell sensors to people and let them deal with data. We want to really do what we do and teach them how to interpret data that they get at the right spatial scale for informed decision making in the face of accelerating climate change, like all of that. How do you commercialize that? And so we got creative about thinking how to do that. put me in touch with a lot of local startup and VC type folks to think about that and explore it. There are some great emergent and established climate tech accelerator programs. Elemental Accelerator, we're currently participating with, has a fantastic network and programming of thinking about what it takes to take this kind of stuff at scale. This was all unheard of 10 years ago, or it was only a niche kind of climate, maybe energy, and now it's opened up much broader to climate threats that we see at large. That's what we need, kind of all hands on deck to be able to solve this.
Yeah, so I'm in the nonprofit space, so I don't think a lot about commercialization, and I work for, in support of a system that is about publicly accessible data for the public good. But, it's also a place where public-private investment can, kind of be joint together. Our users range from the public to industries. And so the whole idea behind the blue economy, the new blue economy, the information-based new economy, is that you're going to be able to take data, even publicly accessible data, and from that create information services that are tailored to the needs of customers who may pay for this. And we really don't, I think, understand yet how to quantify that. We've even tried to quantify the value of the IUS data, even though nobody has to pay for it. And, the result of just a pilot effort in that is that the data value direct, not even talking about down the value chain, but just between a direct user and the system, is 5 times what the government in the US puts into the system. So the value's there, we just need to figure out how to understand it. And in terms of using the systems out there to help scale and meet some of these actionable user needs, I think the example from Brian and IUS, is a nice one where there was a need, and you can have these public-private partnerships to help kind of scale to meet the need and implement these new technologies.
Okay, well, thank you, Kristen. I think that's a nice note to end on. We have hit the hour. I'd like to be respectful of most folks who are operating on the Zoom clock now. So about to time out at 4. For those of you that are on, you will be able to see the video. It'll be available within the next week or so. It'll be available to everybody on YouTube. So, if you found value in this webinar and you know friends who might find value in it, you can send them the link, and then they have the benefit that they can also watch it at twice the speed like I do and get through things faster. So thanks very much again to our speakers for sharing with us the exciting work that you're doing and really engaging in a very nice way. I think that was good for everybody. So we hope to see you all again the next Technology Earth webinar. Bye.